Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. Just a reminder that next week I'll be at Too Many Games on Friday and Saturday. I'm doing the panel on Saturday, and I'll probably just be wandering around Friday, and will definitely be at the Psycho Stick show. But I'm telling you that both to invite everybody there. Find me somewhere and say hi. I'd love to meet all of you. But also, I may or may not be able to do the Q&As next week. I think everything will fall into place, and I think I'll be able to get it out Thursday night, but there's a bunch of stuff going on that I have kind of a deadline for, so I'm pretty sure everything's going to be cool, but I just wanted to give you advanced warning. If you don't see a Q&A next week, I'll just double it up the week afterwards. But anyway, let's jump right in. First up, over on Subscribestar, the importer asks any inside info regarding an upcoming Mr. Core for Game Boy Advance, PC Engine CD, Sega CD, Neo Geo MVS or AES, or the Capcom CPS. So while I don't have any insider info, I am always kept in the loop of everything that's going on, which is public. And anything that's not public, it's still just it's stuff that's kind of in the know on the Discords and stuff. So public enough. But no word on the GB Advance Core yet. Any progress might have just been booting the Nintendo screen or something. And I'm saying this respectfully, of course, but I would not count on that happening anytime soon. It's just so complicated and so much different than a lot of the other stuff that they were working on. So I would just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. PC Engine CD and Sega CD. I think Ash Evans was trying to work hard on any of the optical drive emulation, and I think once one of them gets in there, the rest are going to kind of get a little bit easier. Sega CD is a weird one, though, because it's not just an optical drive emulator. You'd have to run an FPGA of the chips itself. So that one's going to be harder, and I would guess, just a guess, that you would see PC Engine CD first, and then you would eventually see probably others, and then Sega CD, just a guess. Neo Geo, Furtek has been all over that. He's been posting updates on his Patreon. Please consider throwing him a Patreon subscription, and he does it where you only pay after there's a big update. So months could go by and you don't pay a penny, but if he has a big update, then then whatever your donation is, he takes. So it's kind of the opposite of me. I do weekly stuff, and that's kind of what people are donating for, that and the behind the scenes stuff. Whereas Furtek is very much like, he doesn't want to put a time limit on it in case he runs into problems, but so you only get charged when he has an accomplishment, and he's been doing some great things. So I think that's not too far away. There's still a lot of really challenging technical hurdles to get over, but he's working with Yotego and to try to work out some of those, and they're still trying to figure out if you'll need a different RAM module than you do with the current Mr. setup. So that's exciting stuff. And I believe the CPS, I think that was mentioned that people wanted to do other things first so that they're familiar with the chipset that came before that, or the chipsets that came before that, to kind of get, it's kind of like walking through the shallow end before you start swimming versus just diving over the deep end and trying to figure out how to swim. So I don't know if that's still the case, but that's what they mentioned. So the only thing I could say for sure is that everybody's putting in a ton of effort, and the people that are involved in this love this as much as we do. So exciting stuff with Mr. I would be confident buying one, and even if you eventually have to buy a second RAM module, whatever, it's probably one of the cheapest parts of this thing. So good questions, and I hope that kind of was a quick summary of where all those projects are at. Over on Patreon, starting up with a no-named contributor, wants to know if I had watched the 8-Bit Guy video. I can't tell if you're trolling me or not. If you are, touche, that's awesome. But that's one of the things I was actually bitching about. I showed footage of that video at the beginning of mine, which was kind of a nod to the 8-Bit Guy, and also kind of like a way of saying, I've seen the good videos, here's my way of showing all the rest. So can't tell if you're teasing or not. If you are, it's funny. If you're not, I tried to explain it all last week, so I won't go into it again. But yep, I've definitely seen that one. Mandy Zero had an idea after watching the X-Band documentary from Wrestling with Gaming, which, if you haven't watched it, definitely check it out. It is really great. And it's basically a way of doing the same thing for all consoles, using different software and hardware that's out there. I don't want to read through the whole paragraph, but basically, Something like that might be possible with newer consoles, but with older consoles, you're always going to have the same lag that X-Band had. And without going too technical, it's basically because of the way that the signals are generated, and that there's no video frame buffer on the outside of those. So no matter what, you're always going to have a minimum of 1 frame delay between player 1 and player 2. And sometimes that's good enough, sometimes it's not, really depends on the game and the setup and everything. Whereas with consoles that start out having a frame buffer, you at least have that ability to write to the software before the frame is delivered to the screen. So you could theoretically get that working with zero lag, and you would need something like Parsec, the streaming software that you mentioned. I'm not doing it justice by calling it streaming software. Please watch the interview if you're not quite sure what that is. But I think the better way to do that would actually be through emulation. And that's why, that's one of the many reasons why, if certain things fall into place, a device like the Polymega, I don't know if it will be the Polymega, but a device like it would have the most potential for things like that. Because you could build in Parsec software, you could have run-ahead modes enabled so that you could, especially with things like N64, you'd be able to write to the controller inputs before it's delivered on screen, and you could kind of finagle something that might be a close to zero lag experience like that, two-player over the internet. But no matter what, with the original ones, you'd have to write the emulator from scratch, and you'd still probably get 1 frame of delay. So there's a lot of different ways you could do it. You could do the X-Band for every console, and it's not a maybe. You absolutely could do something like the X-Band for every console. It's just a matter of how much latency would there be. So using emulation would be one of the ways to really reduce that. So if you're really, if the goal is to do that on original consoles, it's almost impossible to do it without any delay at all, and it pretty much is impossible for any of the older consoles. So it's a good idea, and it's something that I've certainly talked to a bunch of people about, and I just really hope that projects like Polymega would be able to pull something like that off. And I'm being so hands-off about that just because when I did the interview, so many people accused me of now just going corporate and being a shill, and that's not it at all. I was afraid that Polymega was a scam. It's not. It's a real product, and it has the potential to do all these things. But until they do it, I don't want to give credit for something that's not done yet. So I think if you're looking for two-player action or for classic consoles, emulation's the way to go. And platforms that would have it built in at their core emulation might be the best way to do that. You could probably pull it off with stuff like a Raspberry Pi too, but having two of the exact same consoles on both sides, running the same hardware, the same software, that would probably be a better way to do that. Diego has a question about PAL GameCubes. He said he has a PAL GameCube that he would love to be connected to an OSSC and output progressive scan. If I understood correctly, a good way to do this is having an SD media launcher with Swiss, so I could play NTSC games or force PAL games into 480p or 576p. However, in order to output that, I should need some of these new GC video solutions that use the digital port. I was thinking about purchasing the Eon Mark II, which has an analog Wii output port. My question is, can I plug a Wii SCART cable there and output progressive scan? So it sounds like you have a full grasp on the whole situation. You cannot get progressive scan out of the RGB output of a stock PAL GameCube. You can get RGB in 15 kilohertz, but that's it. But you already figured that out, so you're asking, can you get an Eon Mark II and get a Wii SCART cable and get progressive scan? And I'm 99.9% sure the answer is yes. I used the official GameCube component solution on a PAL Wii years ago when I was first starting to do the testing, and was able to do exactly what you said in much earlier versions of Swiss before EmuKitted and Extreme started adding a bunch of other crazy stuff. So I would say definitely give it a shot. I don't think you'll have any problems. And if anybody here has had any different experiences, please post and let Diego and I know. But it definitely could have been done with the original Wii component cable, which makes me think it should work fine with the Eon Mark II. Tofu Man had a great post. I'm going to read it through and then interrupt once or twice. Sorry. He said, I have to say I was pretty disappointed how the de-yellowing series ended. I'm one of the people you mentioned who English is not their first language, or in his case, not even the second language. And I'm not sure whether I realized you were just goofing around. I kind of just expected you to do the easy, lazy way first, and then proceed with a more serious attempt. And I replied about in what my opinion would be a better tactic. So, right, exactly. You were one of the people that responded and commented positively. Or even if it was negative, it still was a fair comment. You didn't just immediately call me stupid or do anything else. So let me just continue going. The people who support you financially probably all would have liked to see you continued, the series. And for myself, I was really hoping to finally see something like you proposed for part 3, an expert in plastics explaining what really happens when the yellowing and de-yellowing has any adverse effects. Anyways, I guess that won't happen now. It won't happen in the short term. It'll happen eventually. I'm just not gonna go back and spend hours and hours and hours on a video series that I took way more flack for than positivity. I just wish you have looked at the haters a bit different and realized their interactions are worth gold, since every piece of interaction, regardless of whether you enjoy it, will help your channel grow and help you find new audiences who can appreciate what you're doing. It's a good point, but that also, to your exact point, means that would mean I would have to change the way I do things to cater to that specific audience. I mean, if all the supporters want that to happen, that's fine. But I think in my life personally, every time I've tried to be anything other than me, I've failed. So I think many people are like that too. You got to just go with what you know and always try to learn and grow and stuff like that. But continuing on, you obviously don't owe me anything, so don't worry about it. But ask yourself, is your channel about producing content for your supporters or not making content because of your haters? Well, this is a really selfish thing to say, but the channel's about producing content that I would like to produce. And I really hope that people would like to see it as well. But if I start having to make content that I don't want to produce, this is a horrible thing to say, but I'm going to quit and go get another IT job, because I could make 3 or 4 times what I'm making through RetroRGB doing what other people want me to do in a different environment. So while I agree with every single word that you have said in this post, and I respect all of your opinions, it is also the other side of that is I love what I do, and that's kind of the reason why I don't mind working 12 plus hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week. It's why I really enjoy helping people with a lot of these projects that are going on behind the scenes, some of which are finally starting to take shape, so I'll actually be able to talk about them for once. And if I stop loving what I do, I'm just not going to do it. So it's not about not making content because of my haters. It's about if something I worked hard on ended up just making me really upset, I don't want to do it anymore, which is selfish. But I'm always transparent, and I appreciate the hard questions like this. And whether you like the answers or not, they're always going to be the honest answers. So I completely get everything you're saying. I'll eventually jump back into the Retro Bright stuff. There is the 8-Bit Guy video out there now. The Paraphractic guy, Christian is his name. I keep forgetting the name of the channel. He's got a few that are great as well. I would like to dig into the scientific part of things. I think I'll just do it in a different way where it won't attract the crowd that, the YouTube hater crowd, I guess. So thank you for, please keep the hard questions coming. I obviously appreciate the support, and I appreciate the hard questions as well. And hopefully I cleared it up a little bit. And thank you for just being a person with your opinions and not being mean about it. John, aka Chicken John from Tasty Chicken in Bensonhurst. Really like their food. He's not paying me to say that. I really mean that. He said, "Can you get a Gallagher size hammer and smash some more shit?" Which is kind of funny that his comment came right after Tofu Man's. So no, I'm not. I'm only going to be smashing one more thing, and it is not a console. However, if you have a hammer bigger than the one that I borrowed in that video, I will borrow that one. The bigger the hammer, the better. But in all seriousness, you said you have 2 more PlayStation shells in a Dreamcast shell you'll gladly donate. This would motivate me to do my Wii and PS2 shell swaps, and you could have 2 more. So, no, but hold on to those in case we ever do go back and do retro brighting stuff. If you have any yellowed plastics or anything, or especially cracked plastics. That's one that I think would be a great test, where we, I've seen a bunch of Nest shells that are yellowed and cracked and fallen apart. So if you get a replacement one of those, save the original one that you can't really do anything with anyway. You're not going to preserve or sell a cracked shell. And we'll use those for RetroBrite testing in the future. And I also won't feel bad if you have like the top of a Nest that's already cracked in half. I won't feel bad taking some scissors and cutting it into pieces to try different tests. I'll get back to it eventually. There's other stuff that I really want to get done first that I'm more excited to get to. So, but yeah, the bigger the hammer, the better. There's one coming by the end of the summer, and it would be fun. It'd be fun to have a giant hammer. Sean Sally Lyon had a question about the OSSC. He wanted to know, can you play back PAL content via the OSSC on North American flat screen TVs? Mostly no. Mostly you cannot. Any standard def or lower, it's just not going to work. Computer monitors might be a little bit more compatible, but all the ones that I've tried just didn't work. You would need to get a PAL TV, or at least one that's got universal support, and I don't know of any off the top of my head. All the ones that I've tried just doesn't work when I put PAL content through the OSSC on it. So if anybody has one that they know works, or if maybe I messed up and forgot to try one of my TVs. I know I tried actually I don't remember which TV I tried. I do remember trying multiple TVs and they all failed with PAL content. So if anybody knows a flat screen TV or monitor that can handle both PAL and NTSC, please post, because that's actually a pretty good question. Christian Meath has a Model 1 Mega Drive with jail bars and video interference that he wants to improve, but says that his soldering skills are at a beginner level. So that's going to be the tricky part. You might want to just find somebody that would be willing to do the mod for you that has a proven track record, because nothing about this is going to be easy, unfortunately. What I would do is, as always as a step one, is lift the subcarrier pin though. And this will disable composite video, so if that's important to you, you might want to think about that. But basically what you would have to do is find the pin, put some flux on it, heat it up with a soldering iron, and then use something like a dental pick or an X-Acto knife or something to lift the pin off the motherboard, being very careful to not break the pin or rip the trace on the motherboard. And doing that can be a giant jump in video quality, and depending on your model and motherboard revision, might be the biggest jump in quality that you get just by removing the subcarrier and getting rid of those interference and jail bars. However, it's my opinion that doing a full bypass is worth it, because you don't just get less interference. The colors are better. Anytime you remove 30-year-old circuits and put your own in, there's a chance that it's going to last longer. And of course, don't forget too that all of these consoles were designed for consumer use, not the very small percentage of people that are going to be using it on upscalers on 4K TVs and stuff like that didn't exist back then. So putting newer components in just by default might improve the picture. But what you do after that is going to really be determined by how you want to use it. So no matter what, you lift the red, green, blue, the RGB pins off that same VDP. Then you put the two capacitors underneath that and one on the other side of the VDP. And that's I think adding the capacitors might actually be the hardest part of all of those things, because you have to put it in a very small spot. You have to kind of scratch up traces on the motherboard to get them in there. So if you're not willing to do that, just lift the subcarrier and just go with that and see if you like it. The rest of it you need for the bypass, and then whether you use Voltar's board or the triple bypass, I would let how everything else around it determine that answer. So for me personally, I really like putting Genesis 2 mini DINs right where the RF jack used to be. That way it's stereo audio through one connector. There's no fumbling with adapter cables if I'm going to the 32X or not. It's just stereo, audio, and video right through that port, and it makes it way easier. So because of that, I just use the triple bypass because it's designed to sit right on top of that mini DIN connector. And you don't even have to worry about pulling stereo from somewhere. It's got the audio built right in. So it's a longer install because you have to remove a bunch of capacitors and then tap audio from those places. But in my opinion, I don't think the audio part of it is very hard. I think everything else about the mod is hard. Adding the mini DIN connector to the motherboard, you gotta scrape up the traces and solder it directly to it. I already mentioned putting the capacitors in, running wires from the lifted RGB pins. That's challenging too, because those are very fragile, so you have to run those wires very carefully. And that would be the same with Voltar's board. And to go back to Voltar's board, if you just want to use the same DIN output that you always have, you don't want to mess with anything else, all your cables are already fine, just use Voltar's board. That way you don't have to worry about anything else. You just run RGBS to that, run it to the multi-out. A method that Jose likes to use is lifting the RGBS output pins of the CXA. Actually, you don't even need to lift sync, because you're not lifting sync off of the VDP. So just lift the RGB pins off of the CXA and solder directly to that part on the motherboard. And it's less time consuming, and you don't have to deal with the DIN. So I would let those three choices determine. Start with the subcarrier. Is that good enough? Do you want to have to deal with everything else? If so, do you want to use a Genesis 2 or a Genesis 1 DIN? And if it's the 2, go to the triple bypass. If it's the 1, use Zax. As far as audio quality, on a Genesis 1, it's going to be the same, whether you use the triple bypass or the original audio on there. There's probably going to be a hair bit of a difference that a discerning ear might be able to pick out. So some people like the sound of the original a little better, but there's less noise because you've lifted everything off of the motherboard. So I would call it even. I think it's fair to just say it's even for, you have both sides of it. So I would just let your use case determine it and think about everything else. So hopefully I didn't nerd out on you too hard. Hopefully it paints a clearer picture and doesn't confuse you more. 40 watt range says, when wiring up a Genesis 1 with Sega CD1 using HD Retrovision cables, should I connect the headphone jack to the Sega CD and then use the Sega CD RCA out to the HD Retrovision cables? It's whatever's easiest. I've always just used the headphone jack directly into where the switch is on the HD Retrovision cables. If you prefer to have the wires all run behind the console and nothing sticking out in front, just get an RCA to 3.5 millimeter cable and connect them that way. It's really whatever's easiest for you. I do have a page on the site that details how to hook up Sega CD audio, and it doesn't matter. I'll skip to the end, because it was all a marketing thing. Sega wanted you to say, hey, spend $200 on this attachment for the console that you already own, and by the way, it could also play CDs in high quality with your stereo. Look, we've even put stereo jacks on the back. So it was, it's more of a marketing thing than anything else. So I would just try whichever's, if you have the cables already, which are cheap, try both, see if one sounds better. Sometimes the headphone jack port can get dirty over the ears and you get a little bit of interference through them. But as far as which one to use, it doesn't really matter, because the audio gets routed through all of the outputs, Sega CD, Genesis, etc. Clint Collage asked, last week Apple announced with the Mac Pro that they'll be offering an FPGA-based Afterburner card that can decode 3 8K streams in parallel. Based on my experience in the field, do I think that this would cause a significant dip in FPGA prices in the future, especially on more powerful FPGAs, as I assume are being used here? Will we all have 4K OSSCs sooner than we think? So that is an excellent question, and that is determined only by which chip Apple uses. So if they want to make their own, which is not probably the easiest, but it's Apple, who knows what they're going to do. If they make their own custom one, or if they have a company like Intel customize one specifically for them, I don't think it would do anything to the rest of the market. However, if they said, hey, Intel, that new chip that you already have and you're already making, we want 1 million of those, right away, then it might actually drive the prices down, because they'll just start making them in larger clips. But hopefully it'll be that. Hopefully the next generation of chip that'll be on the DE10 Nano 2 or whatever the successor to that will be, hopefully that'll be that, and it'll all fall into place and all of us will be able to benefit. But you never know with Apple. It's a total roll of the dice. Clint also asked about the RetroBrite video, and do I still plan on doing a page on the website that shows the proper way or different ways, and even things like a UV light box. at some point, it's just going to be something I do when I have extra time. I've already backlogged 2 videos that should have been out already, so I really want to just catch up with those. And also, space is a giant problem for me. I showed the room tour, and I have no place to put a UV box, and I don't really even have a place to store a bunch of yellowed consoles to go back to this. So eventually, absolutely, I'll get back to all that stuff. But I don't think it's going to be soon. However, the website's starting to get opened up, so maybe I don't think Voltar will do it, but maybe somebody else who's an expert in this would be willing to do a post or a write-up with scientific results. No, I tried this once and this is how I did it anymore. Like so many of the other videos out there. If anybody else wants to contribute with reproducible results, science behind it, go full nerd like I like to, then anybody is welcome to post stuff like that. But me personally, it's going to be a little while before I get around to it for all those reasons. Phil Welker says he's thinking of overclocking his N64, but he's not sure how to handle heat concerns. How do I monitor the heat? How hot is too hot? Is there a specific number of degrees that shouldn't be crossed? You're kind of bringing me back to my thermal testing days at the medical grade computers. I dealt with that a lot. I spent like months on stuff like this. The general basics are you need thermal probes attached to the chip. You need to take testing in a regular environment. I'm assuming your N64 is always going to be reasonably placed, on a shelf, on a table, not like, under a couch or something. So have a reasonable metric to measure by, and then try overclocking and see how hot it gets. And how hot is too hot? That depends on the data sheet of the chip, which you said you couldn't really find anything online. I don't really quite remember that either. And don't forget too, just because one chip might be rated at a very high temperature, you have to also worry about the ambient temperature and everything around it. So I would put a few more thermal probes around everywhere else. And to be honest, I can't remember reading a good guide on how to overclock an N64 or anybody that went through the trouble of doing all that. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and if anybody knows of one, please let us know and I'll try to link to it or something. But I mean, if you want to do the experiment, I would try that, and I would just try to find a heat sink and a fan. You could run it with the top off. I think it'd be pretty safe to do that as long as you don't let the cartridge flop around while you're playing it. There's a lot of different things you could do. I guess I would just do more research on what other people have found and see if anybody else has gone through the trouble to do all of that. And if you're the first, then just document everything. You're welcome to post on RetroRGB or anywhere else, if you want to post your findings. But it's a tricky one because you never know how anything's going to react. And the people that I know that did overclock their N64 got very mixed results. Sometimes you get higher frame rates on certain games and it's awesome. Other times that, it just, the mod just stopped working after a while because you're soldering to some real fine pitch stuff. So it's kind of a dangerous mod, I think. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of got nothing for you. I apologize. But if you find any info out, please keep us in the loop and maybe it'll end up being a post or something. Well, that's it for this week. For anybody new to the Q&As, feel free to ask any question you'd like. Just please post the question in the newest video wherever you sign up for the support services. I can't really go back to any of the older videos because of the way these things are set up. So whatever your question is, or if I missed a previous question, please just post it again in the newest Q&A video and I'll get to it the next week if I can. And also, I do make these public about a month after they go live to supporters, but I turn off comments because this is really just focused on the supporter experience and a small way of saying thank you for supporting the channel, all the behind the scenes work, and everything else that goes on. So once again, thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.